one of the questions which is most interested for Polish people now, it's what should happen in order to activate this Article 5? Because now it seems unclear what kind of conditions need to be on the battlefield or front line, or what should happen for the targeting this article.
Right. I understand why people are probably going to focus on Article 5, but it does call for material breaches. So in other words, it's not anything that might trigger it. It has to have a material military impact on what's happening inside of any given NATO member state. And 19 drones, while deeply troubling, is probably not sufficient to cause an Article 5 trigger. I think what it does need to be triggering, though, is absolute resolve that Europe itself needs to be making red lines. And they can start to do those. Those can be articulated. And I think this would be the best messaging that Poland could do, is start interdicting these drones over Ukraine, obviously with Kiev's approval and coordination. Provide some kind of air shield in Western Ukraine, maybe as far as Lviv, ideally further. In my opinion, I'd love to see Kiev protected as well, where these drones are starting to be shot down by Polish Air Force fighters so that they don't even come close to reaching Polish airspace. And as an added benefit, they also don't reach any intended Ukrainian targets.
In your recent article, which you mentioned about in The Hill, you described together with your colleague Colonel Swede that this attack on Poland is also kind of a signal to President Trump, who last week met with Polish President Karol Nawrocki. What kind of reaction do you expect from the US president? Might he respond with maybe new threats of new wave of sanctions?
Yeah, unfortunately, so far, the president has been muted somewhat. He was out at a dinner last night. It was clear that he had been informed of what was happening in Poland. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, came out and made statements to the effect that he was aware of it as well. But so far, we've not seen any strong condemnation of what they did. But I think that he should. Look, and in many ways, Putin is taunting Trump here. Not just after the Alaska summit, but clearly it's important to take note as well, just as it was important to note China and that connection with the Shanghai conference with Putin. It's important to note that it just took place on the heels of that meeting between Karol Nawrocki, the the president of Poland, with Donald Trump in the White House, where Donald Trump was quoted as saying, look, we're willing to send more troops to Poland, meaning U.S. troops, if Poland wants. And so this is certainly messaging back from Putin to him, to Donald Trump, that, look, I heard you and it's not acceptable. Now the onus is on Trump to say, no, look, I'm the one that holds the cards and I'm going to hold you accountable for this. But so far, unfortunately, we've not heard that yet from the White House.
And also interestingly that these strikes came after the Donald Tusk announced the closure of border with Belarus yesterday. And for the first time, drones came from the Belarusian territory. Do you see the connection between these events?
There is, and there's an important military exercise that happens annually here called the Sabad exercise, which is a joint effort between Russia and Belarus. And so part of what we probably saw last evening in Poland was a probing action. In other words, if you're going to have a training session or training exercises with Russian and Belarusian troops, what better to prepare for than seeing how NATO reacts to some type of attack coming from the Russian side and the Belarusian side. So I think it was interesting, and it's really important that you pointed it out. If these just didn't cross over from Ukrainian airspace, but Belarusian airspace as well, that tells me that they were testing NATO's air defenses. They wanted to see what reacted, what didn't react, how quickly they reacted, and all those things can be dialed into these training exercises that are upcoming. So I think that's very significant. And I think it's just, more signaling from Russia that, look, Belarus and Russia are partners, and we're going to view this, as a joint effort, if it comes to that, against NATO member states like Poland in the future.
Should we expect more incidents like this during this exercise called Zapad or West 2025?
Yeah, it's a good question. Time will tell. I do think overall, though, what I would anticipate until the West pushes back firmly and basically starts shooting down these drones before they ever near NATO airspace, and that means interdicting them over Ukraine itself, which would be an added benefit to your country. I think we will see continued efforts like this for Russia to intimidate the West. Look, the gloves are off. They clearly have been willing to do this. Of course, we're getting all the typical denials that come out of the Kremlin and basically lying about it, claiming no one knows that these are Russian drones, et cetera. That's obviously, BS, to put it politely, on your show. So I think we will see more of this. Whether it comes in these exercises or not, hard to tell, because at that point, when you're doing exercises, you're somewhat more exposed, and they may not want to provoke NATO at that point into taking action or to believing that NATO's under attack again. And then it might be prove more costly to Russian and Belarusian forces.
It's unlikely Russian drones could have reached Poland if Ukraine had a stronger air defense system. Allies like Germany and France recently announced new arms deliveries. But should we expect, especially after this situation, Ukraine's air defenses to be strengthened even more?
Yeah, great question, Colonel, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the fact that the drones are able to travel that far, and you compare that to Israel's success rate in basically interdicting, stopping, if you will, destroying the Iranian drones that traveled even further, is a sign of weakness on the part of NATO. And Colonel Sweet and I, the individual that wrote the article with me this morning in The Hill, we've long called for more robust defenses of Ukraine, not simply to protect the cities, and as vital as that is, and civilian targets, but to be able to allow Ukraine also to push up some of its air assets to protect your frontline forces in the Donbass, and then further south towards Crimea and Zaporizhia as you defend against any kind of Russian movements coming from Crimea. That's important as well. So absolutely, there needs to be more. And we've kind of called these type of calls as game changers. The West needs to be sending game changer messages to Putin to change his cost calculus, make his war in Ukraine unacceptably high for him. Tragically, he's willing to spend lives to do that. 1 million plus men and women, Russian soldiers, along with some North Koreans and Chinese, have been killed or wounded, and that doesn't seem to affect his calculus. But I think what would change his calculus is if his attacks have no effect while Ukraine's attacks, your deep strikes, especially with the Flamingo coming onto line, your long-range deep precision strike weapon, if that calculus changes and he's not having any substantive impact in Ukraine, while Ukraine is having more and more, such as destroying 17 to 18% of their oil and energy infrastructure, then that might change Putin's thinking of whether or not he can continue to sustain this war in Ukraine.
Given the scale of NATO involvement, do you think we could be moving toward a joint air patrols over Ukraine, which could basically help to protect Poland and other eastern flank countries?
Look, I hope so. I mean, I saw earlier today that President Zelensky called just for that. And Europe has long talked about some kind of sky shield. Now, it's always been caged in a post-war environment. Now, again, I think Ukrainians, I don't need to tell you, you know that Putin is not going to accept any peace as a long-term peace. He interprets peace as a pause, and then he's going to come at Ukraine again. So I think the sooner that a sky shield comes into place with a coalition of the willing, if you will, if they're not technically NATO fighters, but they're going to have to be. I mean, basically, for that type of shield to be effective, it's going to take Polish Air Force forces, it's going to take British, it's going to take U.S. forces, and it's going to take the coordination of U.S. intel, as well as logistical support, the air tankers, et cetera, to make sure that they can stay up in the skies and actually patrol. I do think that it needs to be happening, and I think Zelensky is right to call for it. Whether that will happen or not, I remain skeptical, sadly. I hope that it does, and I'm going to keep calling for it.